Welcome to This Explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into the decision-making secrets of some of history's absolute heavyweights. We're going to explore this totally fascinating, incredibly high-stakes tension between having a rigid, unwavering vision and possessing fluid, adaptable pragmatism. It's a journey that's going to completely change how you view leadership, history, and honestly, maybe even your own day-to-day choices.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at defining grand strategy, foxes versus hedgehogs, the Athenian tragedy, the overreach trap, and finally, we'll wrap up with the art of tethering.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, defining grand strategy, aspirations versus capabilities. We're pulling all of today's incredible insights straight from the Pulitzer Prize-winning book on grand strategy by Lewis Gaddis. It's an absolute masterpiece that examines how great leaders across history either perfectly align their goals with reality or, well, fail spectacularly trying.
And to really understand spectacular failure, we have to travel back to the year 480 BCE. Picture this. The Persian king Xerxes has built this massive, incredibly ambitious bridge of boats across the Hellespont so he can invade Greece. But a storm rolls in and just completely destroys his bridge. So how does the king react? He literally orders his men to whip and brand the ocean water. He even throws iron fetters into the sea to punish it. This is a man who truly believes his own sheer will can literally conquer nature.
And you know, that wild historical story perfectly illustrates our core definition for today. Grand strategy is the alignment of potentially unlimited aspirations with necessarily limited capabilities. See, Xerxes failed because his infinite kingly imagination completely ignored his stubbornly finite means. He thought he could just flatten any environment to suit his needs. But as history shows us time and time again, when you forget that your capabilities have limits, you're pretty much doomed.
Moving right along to section 2, foxes versus hedgehogs, a tale of two mindsets. This brings us to a brilliant framework popularized by the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who drew on a tiny fragment of ancient Greek poetry that goes, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." It's a perfect contrast. The fox is adaptable, cautious, highly tactile, and constantly adjusting to its surroundings. The hedgehog, on the other hand, well, kind of like King Xerxes, is rigid, visionary, and stubbornly tries to force the environment to fit their one big, overarching idea.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, fun philosophy, but so what? Well, this concept is actually backed up by modern cognitive science. Researcher Philip Tetlock collected over 27,000 predictions from experts. And the results? Foxes were highly proficient forecasters. Why? Because they were self-critical and constantly stitching together diverse pieces of information. The hedgehogs, their accuracy was basically that of a dart-throwing chimp. Seriously, they were so aggressive with their big explanations that they just got trapped by their own preconceptions. The takeaway here is that foxes historically make vastly better predictions than hedgehogs because they adjust to reality rather than fighting it. That brings us to section 3, the Athenian tragedy, the trap of strategy. Let's zoom in on ancient Greece. After defeating the Persians, Greece essentially split into two heavily armed rival camps. On one side, Sparta. Think of them as tigers. They absolutely dominated the land domain, lived in a harsh culture of scarcity, and were a pure, highly disciplined warrior elite. On the other side, we have Athens. They were the sharks. They dominated the sea, possessed immense wealth, and operated as a thriving maritime democracy. To protect themselves from Sparta's terrifying land army, Athens built the famous Long Walls, connecting their city directly to their port. They intentionally turned themselves into an untouchable artificial island. At first, this was a totally brilliant, foxy strategy. But then, things took a turn. By 433 BCE, the great Athenian leader Pericles essentially lost his flexibility. He enacted a stubborn economic embargo called the Megarian Decree, and, terrified of looking weak, he absolutely refused to back down. This obsession with credibility sparked a devastating war with Sparta. Because the entire population of Athens crowded behind those long walls for safety, a horrific plague broke out, killing Pericles in 429 BCE. Without his guiding hand, Athens slid down a terrible slope. They lost their moral compass, eventually massacring the neutral island of Melos, and then launching a completely disastrous, wildly overextended military expedition to Sicily in 415 BCE. Which leads us right into section 4, the overreach trap, echoes of empire. So I have to ask you,
How on earth does a tiny peripheral economic decree lead to the fall of an entire empire? Well, it happens through a psychological trap. It's the trap of credibility. Leaders slowly turn into hedgehogs. They become so terrified of looking weak over minor issues, like that Megarian decree, that they commit immense resources to conflicts that don't actually serve their vital interests. They build walls between what matters and what doesn't, but then, ironically, they tear those walls down out of pure fear.
And here is where it gets hauntingly familiar. The source text draws a direct, analytical line between the strategic misalignment that trapped Athens in Sicily and the exact same logic that trapped the United States in Vietnam centuries later. The analysis points out that in both historical instances, leaders were driven by a profound fear of falling dominoes and expanding enemy alliances. They became completely obsessed with maintaining credibility at all costs, and that obsession resulted in the massive deployment of troops far from home, creating a disastrous strategic misalignment of means and ends. It is the exact same trap, just repeating across millennia.
And to put the cost of that strategic rigidity into perspective, 58,213. That is the staggering number of American lives lost in Vietnam. When leaders stop being adaptable foxes and instead become stubborn hedgehogs, blinded by abstract concepts like credibility, the real-world consequences are ultimately paid in human lives.
Finally, let's look at the solution in Section 5, the art of tethering, holding opposites.
Master Sun Tzu really hit the nail on the head here when he wrote, "The nature of water is that it avoids heights and hastens to the lowlands." This beautifully captures the concept of tethering. See, truly great leaders don't just pick one mindset and stick with it. Instead, they combine the hedgehog's ultimate, unwavering sense of purpose with the fox's fluid, practical sensitivity to the environment. They act exactly like water. They are always moving toward their ultimate goal, but they're perfectly willing to flow around obstacles rather than wasting their energy trying to smash through them.
A perfect historical example of this, young Octavian, the man who would eventually become Augustus, Rome's absolute paramount leader, he actually shadowed his great-uncle, Julius Caesar, and observed that Caesar's fatal flaw was a massive lack of self-assessment. So Octavian mastered command by doing things a bit differently. He took a hard look at his own physical and political limitations. He didn't just rush in, he acted expediently. He leveraged his limited assets to maneuver around his rivals, like Mark Antony, rather than just charging headfirst into every battle. In short, he successfully tethered his massive ambitions to a very realistic understanding of his actual capabilities.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. The great F. Scott Fitzgerald once said that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So as you make decisions in your own life and work, ask yourself, are you a stubbornly rigid hedgehog? Are you a reactive darting fox? Or can you tether both together, keeping your eyes firmly fixed on the horizon while your feet carefully navigate the rough terrain right in front of you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep adapting, and I'll see you next time.